When we're ready. All right, it's just about time to begin, and Peter is going to lead our minds in an opening prayer.
Father, we thank you that we're here this morning to look into the beginnings of your plan of redemption for mankind and for us personally. We thank you for that, Father, and we ask that in everything we do, we look to the cross and what it has done for us. And thank you for Jeff and his studies, and we look forward to looking into this morning. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, we're in Genesis chapter 9.
Just like to say, you got me into a lot of trouble.
I did.
Because I try and explain to people at work that I could outrun a cheetah.
Oh, yeah. That was kind of a weird class last week. And it went off on some weird tangents. But it was fun though. It's interesting. All right. In chapter 9, I mentioned when we started last week, God gives 7 directives in chapter 9, and all 7 of them are still in effect even to this very day. And as we went through them, we noticed in the first one was a command for Noah and his sons to multiply and fill the earth. The second one was that God was going to take some kind of direct action on animals to make them fear humans. That as time went on, he mentions also later on in the paragraph that meat is now acceptable to eat as well as plants. So they have the right to do that now. The only provision was that they weren't allowed to eat meat that still had what in it? Blood. So he mentions that. And the fifth one we talked about last week was the sin of murder. And not only was it mentioned that it's a sin, but he also mentions what the punishment would be for murder, even in this life. And that was what, if it's truly murder, the punishment was the death penalty. So that goes back to the very beginning of time. And then I'm going to start reading in verse 8 here. Then God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I now establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, all those that came out of the ark with you, every living creature on earth. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears the rainbow will appear in the skies, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on earth." So God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." So there's two additional things that God mentions here as far as his covenant was concerned and his directives. And one is that he will never again do what?
Destroy the earth by water.
Destroy the earth by water. And we talked about later on that there is going to be a time when the earth is destroyed again, but it won't be by water. It'll be by fire. And then the seventh thing, the final thing that God mentions that he's going to do, and that's part of the covenant, is a testimony towards the covenant itself to remind mankind and everyone on the earth that he has a covenant with them not to destroy the earth by water again. And what's the sign of the covenant?
Rainbow.
Yeah, the rainbow. And I still hear people all the time. I mean, I think this week or last week, the last couple of weeks, I've heard 3 or 4 different times where people talked about rainbows, and I wouldn't talk about the topic at all. But anytime it rains, people are looking for a rainbow. I mean, it's very common among human beings. They're very fascinated with rainbows, and it's truly a sign that God made human beings very interested in rainbows for some reason. But it does remind us of what God has done in the past. So that's an important thing to know. All right, so let's go on now and read, beginning in, go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, the rainbow thing, it's like the plan of redemption is beginning to start to gather pace in a way. It's already started, but what he's saying is there will be no more judgment between then and the final judgment, except in between there's going to be the cross.
Right.
I think it's starting to become, gets a little bit clearer each step we take.
I would agree with that. I think that's true. So, interesting point.
Two things. I was going to say it's a beautiful picture with Noah, how God used water to wipe out all the sin, and then about the rainbow. In Revelation, you see a rainbow around God's throne.
Yes, that is true. And that's a very interesting point that there's even a rainbow in heaven. I'm glad you brought that up. So, all right, I'm going to read on now. The sons of Noah, verse 18, came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the 3 sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard, and he drank some of the wine. When he drank some of the wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so they would not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend the territory of Japheth, and Japheth live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be his slave." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Altogether, Noah lived 950 years, then he died. What are we noticing about some of the lifespans? We'll see here as time goes on from this point, his lifespan start decreasing. But Noah still lived to be a ripe old age at this point. So, going back to verse 18, the three sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We really don't know for sure who was the oldest, who was the youngest, and it really doesn't matter too much. But he also mentions Ham was the father of who?
Ham.
Yeah, and it's the only son that's mentioned, and Ham actually has 4 sons, and Canaan is the youngest one. So right off the bat, you could think, why is Cain's mentioned in this spot? We'll see. So all the nations of the world eventually come from them, and we'll talk about that when we get into the next chapter. Noah was a man of the soil. So in other words, he was a farmer of some sorts, and he proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of the wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. Now, is it a sin for Noah to have gotten drunk? Is it a sin for Noah to have gotten drunk? Nobody's answering.
I think I would have to say yes, but I think when I read between the lines, I think there was a little more that went on there than I think he must have been really drunk. So
It's possible.
and then when he sobered up, he realized what had been done to him. He was too drunk to realize that it was being done to him when he was drunk, but he sobered up and realized it. So I think that was a bad state for him to be in.
It seems like he's almost unconscious to the point, right?
Yeah. I think he was drunk to the point he was completely unconscious and unable to, make any kind of decisions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he was in a bad place mentally at that point. So
I probably would agree with that. Now, at this point in history, though, is there any commandment that says thou shalt not get drunk?
right. No.
Dan?
I think when he was drunk, there's a lot of context that we don't know, and we probably shouldn't be passing judgment to begin with. But if he had a hard day at work or whatever, he comes home, he eats dinner, he sits down, drinks too much wine after dinner or whatever, and he passes out. Give a little judgment. But if he's going out and he's partying and having a good time and coming home and falls over drunk, it's a little different story.
Okay, we're going to tee off right off what you're saying, though, because that's an important point. What kind of man was Noah before this?
Righteous.
Who said he was righteous?
God said he was righteous.
I mean, if God says somebody's righteous, and that he was an exemplary example for the entire human race, why did Noah do this? And like anytime somebody does something that you might look at and think, why is he doing that? Sometimes there's extenuating circumstances that we just don't know unless we ask questions. Now, I'm not going to say it was a sin. I'm not going to say it wasn't a sin for Noah to get drunk. I'm not really sure. My guess is probably it wasn't a good idea, as you...
I think it was, at the very least, I think it was poor judgment.
Yes.
So,
I would agree with that. It was poor judgment at the very least. Now, does God ever rebuke Noah for being drunk in this spot? He does not. That's not necessarily saying it wasn't still wrong.
Because there was a time when God winked on ignorance.
It could be. There's a lot of things in the Old Testament, and as we go through here too, some people have jumped to a lot of conclusions about a lot of issues that we as Christians find reprehensible, but culture was very different back in those days. And we have to take that into account in a certain respect. And we got to be silent sometimes where the Bible is silent and just say, we don't know.
Well, for example, none of us are taking multiple wives, multiple spouses. Like, we know that's a cultural difference that they had. So, we filter that through that lens.
Yeah. And people struggle with that sometimes, and they condemn characters in the Old Testament for issues like that and other things too. And God never says anything about some of those issues. Matter of fact, he continues to keep blessing some of these characters doing certain things. Even when we're going to I'm going to have an interesting side study when we get to Abraham when he lied about his wife Sarah. And I'll throw it out now. Is it okay to lie? Think about that one for a few weeks, and we'll come back to it later.
I was gonna say, after you said all the things that you said, like him being old and working in the field, that alcohol might have relieved some of the pain or something. And then the other thing I was gonna say was, oh shoot, what was it? I can't remember what I was gonna say, but just might have been something to.
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is I read commentaries before I do classes sometimes. And sometimes these commentators just blast certain biblical characters for certain things they did. And some of them really blast Noah for getting drunk and just ripping him to shreds, saying what an evil thing he's done. This is the downfall of Noah and his perfect life, and he just ruined everything.
But to say to piggyback off of what Dan said, it didn't sound like he intentionally went out to do this. It looks like he planted a vineyard and he drank the wine of it. It could have fermented. He may not have known that, but it doesn't look like he's an alcoholic in today's day.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned alcoholic or a drunkard, you could say. It doesn't appear from the context that would be true of him.
Right.
It may have been an isolated incident, but here's another thought to continue on to with how we judge Old Testament characters. If I were to ask somebody in this class to stand up who's been a Christian for 20 or 30 years, been faithful the whole time, and if I was to ask you, and I got on this blackboard or whiteboard over here, and say, will you tell the class one or two of your most reprehensible sins that you've committed in your life that nobody knows about? How many of you would volunteer for that assignment? How many of you would like to be judged for some of the crazy things maybe some of us have done in our own life? There's some things I've done that I am very ashamed of. And I'm not telling anybody. I haven't told one single human being about some of the things I've done because it's too embarrassing. And I'm ashamed of myself.
Yeah.
Some of them where I was very young, but still, I've done others as a Christian.
Yeah, you can't sort of, if you're going to tell somebody something you've done that you're ashamed of, you have to completely trust that person.
Yes.
So, I know all of you, but I'm not going to.
And even then, you still don't want to tell because you're embarrassed.
It does give me hope that if David can be called a man after God's own heart, after the sins that he committed, it does give me hope that I can be forgiven too. Because I need it. I'm not guilty of murder or adultery, but I'm guilty. So I'm guilty of some sins. So, but yeah, and going back to Noah, look, I don't even know if he was an experienced drinker. This may have been the first time he started drinking the wine out of his vineyard. He may not have known his tolerance level. I mean, there's so many questions that we
just
don't know
don't
the
know.
answers to.
We just don't know.
And I don't think we have to. I think it was poor judgment, but once again, it may have been poor judgment, but it may have been ignorance on his part, you know.
Why do you think God sometimes shares some of the sins of some people that he claims are righteous people? Why does God sometimes share what some of their darkest moments in life? You mentioned David. That's a dark moment, but he was declared by God to be a man.
To God you honor.
Yeah.
To give us all hope.
Why does that give us hope?
But I would say, you say sometimes, to me it appears most of the time. Most of the time the heroes in the Old Testament, we see their flaws. Abraham, all right? I mean, most of them, we see character flaws. And I think it's to make them relatable, you know? And also to remind us that there was a lot of good people that came before Jesus, but ain't none of them were Jesus. Ain't none of them were perfect. So I think it's also, it makes them relatable, but I also think it makes it easy for us to compare a David with a Jesus. David was a good man, all right? He was no Jesus, all right? And nobody else ever was and never will be. So I think it's a reminder of there's only one that's done it perfect.
Okay, good. Glenn and then Peter.
No, go ahead.
Well, I didn't get your thought. You said something?
I'm done.
It was something good though.
Yeah,
I liked what you said.
It's all right.
I forgot what it was now
Yeah,
though. It
I'm
was
out.
good, whatever it was.
Yeah, I think when God looks at a person like David or Abraham, he looks at their whole life. He doesn't look at just incidents that happened in their life. He looks at the tendency and the direction in which their whole life went and is going. And he looks at us in the same way. Not an individual. You in many ways we stumble, but in what direction is your whole life going?
Yeah.
Nah, so it gives us hope.
Oh, yeah.
It gives us hope. I mean, because
Yeah.
none of us is perfect. None of the people we read about were perfect. However, as I can assume that most of them were taken up to heaven. So it gives us hope.
Yeah.
Okay, so no matter how bad of a sin that I committed, and she doesn't know them all either, so, you know.
My wife
it
doesn't
gives
know
me
all
hope.
mine either.
It gives me hope.
Yeah, when you look at Hebrews chapter 11, the Hall of Faith, and all the Old Testament characters that are mentioned, Noah's there. And there's other people there that you wouldn't think would be there.
Yeah, Paul.
What about Rahab? A prostitute. There's all kinds of people in there that you wouldn't think would be there. So let's move on a little bit now. Now notice also too here that after this incident, he was also naked in his tent. Why that is, I don't know, but certainly it's not a sin to be naked in your own tent. But he laid in covered, and at verse 22 it says, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. Now, first off, in that society at that time, it was shameful to see one of your parents naked. Is that any different today? Nobody wants to see their parents naked.
No.
It's something you don't want to see. But Ham goes out and tells his other two brothers that, hey, Dad is drunk, laying in his tent naked. And how does he find that out? Did he look in there? Notice it says, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. Now, I'm trying to get at a little point here too. Canaan's name is brought in here again. Second time Canaan's been mentioned in this paragraph. Ham saw his father naked. Did he go in there by accident and see it? Or did somebody else tell him that Noah was naked, laying in his tent drunk? And let's go on and see if we can kind of guess what is going on here too. But what do Shem and Japheth do when they find out after Ham tells them their dad's condition? What do?
They get something to cover them up.
Yeah, and
They
notice
don't
they
walk
take.
in face first, they walk in backwards.
Yeah, they took
They don't
great
say-
efforts.
Private.
Very private, very respectful, very carefully. They covered him up and they walked backwards, and their faces were turned away, it says. Then in verse 24, Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him. And who's he talking about, the youngest son?
Ham.
I'm thinking it must be Ham.
Okay. Logic would dictate that for the average reader. Now, Karen just said something that's interesting.
Right.
Notice he says in the next verse that when he finds out that his youngest son had what he had done to him, if we're talking about Shem, he's the one that said he saw him. Who gets cursed in the next verse? Ham?
No.
Who?
Canaan.
He's the grandson? Why does Canaan get cursed. And is this a light curse?
No.
How serious of a curse is this?
Lifelong
Lifelong,
slavery.
yeah. And if a man of God curses somebody back in those days, that means it's directly related to and came from who? It probably came from God. So this is a very severe curse, but it's not on Ham, it's on Canaan. Why? Well, I had to try to find out something. Hang on a second. I did a little searching into the Hebrew, and I don't normally like doing that because I am not an expert in it, but I read some commentaries that said something, and I looked at two Hebrew listings, and the actual word there for the youngest son literally means a very little one or a young person. You know how old Ham was at this time? 100 years old. A very little person or very young person, that's the Hebrew word there. When it says that what his youngest son had done to him. It's very common in Hebrew to call your grandson your son. Is this leading anywhere? What could that possibly mean then? Because it seems strange if it's not leading in a different direction.
Sounds like Canaan went in, saw him, told his dad, who then told his brothers.
Logic would seem to push that way. Because it doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at what the actual Hebrew says and the fact of who got the curse. Bill.
Yeah, one of the things also is that what we find happening here is there's a contrast into how things were handled. So let's say Canaan saw and told his dad. What was his dad supposed to do? What did Shem and Japheth do? Right. So here's one of the first instances where God indicates to us that gossip is not permitted or shouldn't be something that we get ourselves involved in.
Yeah.
So Ham, rather than going in and trying to cover his dad, he went to spread the news. And his brother said, okay, all right, let's go clean it up.
Yeah, Ham didn't do anything
Right.
to try to fix it, did he?
He didn't do anything. So that's a contrast into how things are handled.
Yeah. Now, that is correct. But does God curse Ham?
No.
Not even mentioned.
He doesn't even mention, he doesn't say anything one way or the other, but he does curse
Canaan.
Canaan. So we're going to get to that.
That's the second part of
That's the second
my
part.
thought.
Yeah.
Of my thought is that when Noah pronounces the curse and the blessings, as you said before, right? Obviously, this is something coming from God. So this curse of Canaan, obviously, then it's talking about it's Canaan's overall situation in the long run. What happened to Canaan in the long run? And we're talking about the nation of Canaan.
It could be, but I think there's a factor that may figure in here that is a possibility based upon the future of the kind of person Canaan becomes.
Right.
That we have to consider here a little bit too, because this curse on Canaan is so harsh. He doesn't curse Ham. Now Ham could have done something to fix things, but he doesn't. But God doesn't say anything to him. But many have commented on the fact that something else might be going on here.
Yeah, I think we need some wild speculation.
Wild speculation.
Yeah, but to me it seems like to Canaan it was something of a joke. that he sees his grandfather naked
It could
and
be.
no respect going on there.
God actually saw something through, and Noah seems to indicate that. Dan?
You know, I don't know, it might just be my viewpoint on life or whatever, but I look at both sides of the coin a lot. And a lot of times I'm looking at the same side, thinking I'm looking at both. But for Canaan to go in there and see his grandfather naked, for whatever reason he went in there and saw him, out of respect, he may have fled the scene, so to speak, to go tell his dad, look, Grandpa's in there passed out naked. And then Dad goes over and checks and says, yep, he's naked, and then they both leave. He gets his two brothers, and then the three of them go back there and very respectfully cover him up. And Sheena come in, theoretically, that's a good way to do it, because nobody can be accused of taking advantage or causing the drunkenness, because there was witnesses there the whole time.
Yeah. Let me say
Your
this.
old dad or grandpa could have got ticked off, because Canaan, why didn't you just cover me up and let it go? You know, looking at it from his side of the view.
If that's true, and that is certainly a possibility, it doesn't fully explain why Canaan is cursed so harshly.
Exactly.
Something else must have happened to cause Noah to get this angry and pronounce a curse on Canaan that was extremely severe at this point. And in history, when we look at our charts here, if we ever get to them today, do you know what kind of person the Canaanites became? His family and lineage? Do you know what kind of people they were? Sodom and Gomorrah, ring a bell?
They became evil.
Remember when in Genesis, or not Genesis, but Deuteronomy 7, when Moses and the Israelites come into the land of Canaan, 7 nations are mentioned. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, that whole list of 7 nations, they're all of the lineage of Canaan. And what kind of people were they?
Evil.
Extremely evil. In Sodom and Gomorrah, what did they try to do to 2 angels? They tried to rape them. Is that the kind of family line that came from Canaan? If that's true, what might you surmise is a possibility, the Bible doesn't tell us, of what may have happened that got Canaan in so much trouble, because he saw Noah naked, but so did Ham. So the crime should have been the same for both, or the punishment. Canaan got something much worse. Is it possible that Canaan did something sexual? And Noah woke up and realized something was done to him in a sexual way. Something happened. We're not told, but something happened to get that curse on him.
I've always felt that way, but, and like you said, I don't know, I'm reading between the lines, but you think punishment crime, right? Punishment crime, and that's why I've always came to the same conclusion is, well, I don't know, accidentally seeing your father naked in his own tent is, maybe not a good place to be, and maybe he didn't do the right thing after, but I don't know. To me, I just think punishment crime there. And
What happens to his lineage? What is Moses commanded to do to the lineage of Canaan? Because they were the original inhabitants of Israel.
Yeah.
When they came in there, what were they told to do?
Wipe them out.
Murder them all.
Wipe them out.
And they didn't, and they started marrying them, and that got them in bigger trouble.
True.
And what ended up happening then too, they started doing their sexual worships after that. So, this isn't a good group of people. They were virtually almost wiped out though. There's very few Canaanites left.
They should have been, but they didn't.
Yeah, very few were left. So they kind of come off the lineage of the history of nations kind of after that point. So there's really no Canaanites today anymore.
Wasn't Melchizedek the king at that time, and they called Jerusalem.
He's later on.
Salem,
Yeah, he's later on. Salem is Jerusalem, but that's later on.
Or Abraham's time.
that's the
Yeah,
Abraham.
yeah, that's in Abraham's time. We gotta go ahead in time to get to that.
It looks to me like Canaan may have been caught in his dad's or his grandfather's tent when grandpa comes in after drinking the wine, and he caught his grandson in there and passed out. And then have Canaan go out and tell his dad and the rest of the two brothers that Noah caught him in there. Didn't know what he was doing, didn't know whatever. He just knows that he caught him and he passed out. And I think that might have been the biggest part of being cursed so heavily. But I see absolutely nothing in my version of the Bible that says anything sexual whatsoever.
It doesn't say it.
Well, I think you're interpreting things in there that aren't there.
But no, here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that for sure that's what happened. I'm just saying that's what his family line was known for. Something more serious than seeing his grandfather. Canaan did something more serious than just seeing his grandfather, because Ham didn't get any punishment either. So something else happened. And all I'm doing is suggesting it might have been something sexual to get him that angry.
I think the sexuality in that in the family and their lineage was just starting at that point in time. When they got cursed
Yes.
so heavily, I think it was a downhill slope for them. They just went down.
It very well could have been.
Yeah.
So let's go on here a little bit, because I don't want to get stuck the whole time here.
Just one second. Yes, that's the why I brought the thought about the future, because remember now, we're moving ahead. When Abram came into Canaan, land of Canaan, God said, the cup has not yet been full.
Yes.
So, as rightly as Dan said, it's the slide. But by the time Abram comes in, God is saying they still haven't reached the pinnacle yet.
Yeah.
Right? The cup was not yet full. So this cursing could be just the fulfillment of what's gonna happen later on in his life. This is the type of thing, this is who Canaan is, this is what's gonna happen later on. It's gonna be totally wiped out.
Yeah. So let's move on here a little bit. Notice in verse 26, he talks about Shem. What does Noah say about Shem?
Bless it. He blessed him,
Yeah, he blesses him.
because he did the right thing.
He did the right thing. He doesn't really say too much about Japheth, other than the fact that Japheth, his territory will be extended. And we'll get into later on some of that too, when we look at our maps here. That's gonna be the very next thing we do. As far as how the nations of the family of Noah spread out over the earth, nothing's negative said about Shem or Japheth. And then in verse 27, when he talks about extending the territory of Japheth, and may Japheth live in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his slave. Now, there's a little bit of a debate as far as this verse is concerned too, going back to the Hebrew again, which I don't really like doing that, but nonetheless, there is a little bit of a debate as far as when it says Japheth will live in the tents of Shem. And there was three possibilities put out as far as what that means, because in the original Hebrew, it says God will extend the territory of Japheth, and may he live in the tents of Shem. It doesn't say Japheth, it says he. But from context, you can determine that it seems like it's Japheth he's talking about, but some say no, it's not. In other words, God's going to dwell in the tents of Shem, which he already said that basically, but where it doesn't make sense is when he talks about, and may Canaan be his slave, and if he's talking about his being God, well, that doesn't seem to make sense, where he's God, Canaan's gonna be God's slave. So it makes more sense if it is Japheth. So somebody even made a joke too, when it said that Shem was gonna dwell in the tents of or Japheth was going to dwell in the tents of Shem, and that could mean one of three things. It either means they're going to have a close relationship, the two brothers, as time goes on. One person made a comical remark and said, this means that Caucasians will be emboldened or indebted to the Jewish landlords in New York because they own so much property. Or God is the him, and I think the him is really Japheth. So interesting side note too is that Abraham and Noah were contemporaries for 58 years. So we'll get on to that later on as we move along. Yes.
Could it also imply that Shem was the oldest and had like more responsibility, more?
I've read a bunch of things on the commentaries about this,
Uh-huh.
and there doesn't seem to be any agreement as far as birth order is concerned. He may have been. Some said Japheth was the youngest. They kind of debate back and forth. I really don't know. So anyhow, when we get into chapter 10 now, it's called the Table of Nations. And I brought up a couple charts, and I also have this sheet here. This sheet I gave you is actually from Kaufman's commentary, and I added a few things in here too, so you can see the table of the nations and how they spread out over the world. There's literally 70 nations that come from the patriarchal founders through the family line of Noah. 26 are from Shem, 30 are from Ham, and 14 are from Japheth. Some of the biblical genealogies are probably abbreviated or shortened by omission without sacrifice of critical content. Key figures are included while lesser siblings may be left out. Some nations are easily identified while others are very obscure. Many historical nations are indeed correct. It is difficult to verify every nation due to the ancient timeline here. Few ancient documents exist from that time to verify or counter this account. There are critics of this document, but as often they can't prove their objections. And archaeology has dramatically proven many biblical facts to be indeed accurate, and the critics are often wrong. I mean, I don't know how many times critics have said, oh, the Bible's wrong, the Hittites never existed, the Assyrians never existed, there's no such thing as a King David. They're wrong about everything. They always find the evidence sooner or later that the Bible is indeed completely correct. Many of the nations have been conquered or killed in masses. Languages have been changed by their conquerors. Some have immigrated or been forced out of the country into slavery. So there's just been a lot of changes as thousands of years have gone by with all these nations. You can see here that the cradle of mankind started here, and as they spread out, this is pretty much the territory that is associated with Shem, which became the Israelites eventually. Japheth's territory went to the north, and Ham, some of Ham was here, and much of it went south into Egypt, into Africa itself. And here's a bigger map showing a larger section here. You can see Shem was in a lot of these different areas. Ham is more southern, western, and Japheth went up to Europe and all these different areas we can see here. And you can even see on our table here too, when you look at Japheth, when we hear of the descendants of Gomer, we've heard that term, that often is associated with Germany up in here. Parts of Northern Europe, Armenia, the Caucasian nations through Magog were often associated with that. They were always meant to be, Magog was north. Everybody knew that at the time. And even this bottom one, Meshish, often could refer to people who were in Russia or Moscow, in that area. So he kind of spread out into that area. When you look at the descendants of Ham, the first one on the list is Cush. Cush was also the father of Nimrod, which we're going to talk about him in a little bit. They were often the Babylonian era. They were in this particular area too. A lot of their descendants kind of came through this area. The Egyptians, the Philistines, Canaan, we already talked about his lineage. They were almost all exclusively in Israel, in the Mediterranean, right along in this area here. That was, you can see a Cana right there. So then the descendants of Shem, some of the Assyrians came from the descendants of Shem, which they were more eastern. And they also became the father of all the Hebrew nations. So Mesopotamia, they're all, this whole area is Mesopotamia. So you can just kind of see how people spread out into the world, and as time went on, these nations evolved in many different ways. Nimrod, we're going to get to him when we get into chapter 11 a little bit. I don't want to talk about him too much here at this point, because he's an interesting character in his own right. Any questions or comments up to this point? Because otherwise we'd have to start in chapter 10, and I think we're out of time. So, questions or comments? All right, we'll end here. We'll be getting into the next chapter, dealing with the Tower of Babel next week, and we'll try to mention Nimrod a little bit too, because there's some thoughts about him in that particular chapter. So we'll see you next week.
I think a lot of things in the Bible, that's kind of just give you one to go back and look at this book, verify it, look at this book, just get us on check. I honestly look at our flashes. You all tell me why things and you might have seen Grandpa was buying jewelry or something. What's it like that? My son done the same thing. He's done it but it just seems like there's so many different reasons why that boy was there. Other than maybe he saw Grandpa staggering around in the field and he wanted to go check on it. Yeah. Oh, and that could have been part of it right there in and of itself.
I don't have a copy of it.
Otherwise, the punishment could be.
I don't have it. It's off.
So still,
You can Google this. Do you have a cell phone? That's how I did this. I Googled it.
what was the other one? There was another one.
Just say map. Yeah, just say maps of Noah's three sons and how they spread out. If you punch that into a computer, if you say maps of Noah's three sons, you'll get these maps and other ones
Do
too.
you believe, or do, well, I believe that these, what do they call them? You know where Palestine really is?
And they're not really Canaanites.
No, you know where Palestine really is?
I don't know yet.
It's north.
Well, it's Israel. It's in that district.
It's above Israel. It's like a long.
Well,
Mediterranean- I
Palestine
would say.
is right here. Most of Palestine is on the coast of Israel. They didn't come too far inland. They were mostly
Okay,
along
now
the
since
coast.
we've established this, and they're not Palestinians anymore, they're Gaza, because they live in the land of Gaza. They live in the land of Gaza. Okay, so.
Well, just remember something.